Hello and welcome back to Watching Brief for the month of January 2018. Yes, folks, it's a brand new year and I am joined as ever by the wonderful Andy Brockman.
Very kind of you to say that. I couldn't possibly comment, but hello, Mark. And yes, it's still just about January, so we can still wish people a happy New Year, can't we?
Yes, we can. Yes. This we are a little bit later than normal, but there are good reasons for that. But we shan't go.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, we should recognise the Lunar New Year, which is about to hit us as well, certainly in certain cultures.
Of course, yes. So it's quite appropriate for a pair of lunatics to do that. But nonetheless, we are here, and we are here pursuing as ever our watching brief, to observe the archaeological news of the day, to digest it, to talk about it, and to present it to you guys at home, so you can add to the conversation below in the comments. And this month, even though it's been the beginning of the year, it's actually been quite a busy month. Yeah, busier than we otherwise thought it might be. Yeah, we had a bit of a hard time narrowing this one down, didn't we?
I think so. It's normally after Christmas and New Year, January is a bit dull and a bit empty, and people are feeling a bit depressed. There was it Blue Monday, isn't it? Where it's meant to be the most depressing day of the year, which we've just had. But in fact, in terms of the kind of stories that I cover on Pipeline, there's been some really quite big stories breaking. We began really the month with the collapse of Carillion, a major construction company in the UK, where we thought a lot of archaeology jobs could be affected. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, it seems that the archaeology sector's dodged the bullet on that one, and it hasn't been as badly impacted as people feared it might be. But then just in the last 10 days, there's been two major stories breaking, which we're going to be discussing this afternoon.
And actually, speaking of which, today, linked with the Carillion thing, we also saw Capita, which is another one of these sort of fingers in many pies companies, losing tremendous amounts of share price value. Is it
40% on the day last time I checked, about an hour and a half ago?
Which is crazy, and down to 2004 share prices apparently. So, yeah, this idea of a booming Britain with record low employment is an interesting one. So in many ways it's true. In many ways it's more complicated than that. And I think archaeologists tend to feel the bite fairly. We tend to be we're very much a litmus test, I think, archaeologists, in terms of how the market's doing.
Well, certainly, I've been doing research on the Capita's. We started with the Carillion story, and now we've got Capita happening as well. And certainly, people I've spoken to in the archaeology sector, in commercial archaeology, have been saying that the existence of these massive companies which do everything, basically taking advantage of the government stepping back from providing services, they take on a contract, like for example to build a road, mm-hmm. and then they subcontract virtually every function of that particular contract. Mm-hmm. And this is where the commercial archaeology units can be really badly impacted on this. And certainly people have been telling me that it's had an effect on wages and the amount that companies can charge. It's driven down
the race to the bottom.
To the bottom, absolutely. Yeah. It's driven down the prices that units can charge, to the extent that sometimes it's actually not even commercially viable, or barely commercially viable.
Yeah, and also, I mean, this wasn't one of the stories that we were going to talk about, but it's worthwhile just adding to it. As much as part of the structure of the way that these things work is that they're living, as it were, in numbers wise from check to check. So they're constantly having to go to staff one job with the intention of paying that with the funds of the next job, and
exactly, it's not just archaeology. It's the whole of that area of the economy is funded on cash flow, and if the cash flow is interrupted, everybody's hit.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily criticism of capitalism, not just yet, but it is. We're not there yet, but
You haven't looked at some of the message forums I've been looking at.
but nonetheless, yeah, it's been an interesting start to the year from that standpoint.
I
Certainly.
think it's one we might be coming back to later on in the year, to be frank.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Anyway, something else that we are returning to is our first story of the month, and that is the story, the ongoing developing story at Goodwin Sands.
That's right. Just to recap for people who were this is in earlier episode, in the previous episode,
Previously on Watching
previously
Brief.
previously on Watching Brief, the Port of Dover is involved in a massive £250 million development called the Dover Western Docks Revival Project, and to complete that project, it says it needs tens of thousands of tons of sand and gravel to aggregate to complete the construction process. And it says that it is essential that this material comes from the nearest available source, which is the Goodwin Sands, which were actually dredged for sand and gravel in the 1970s.
And just to be clear, they're saying it's essential, presumably, for environmental reasons.
Partly for environmental reasons that they are saying,
i.e. the footprint of how.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're saying, for example, that the CO2 footprint of the dredger would be excessive if they're forced to go to a source that's further away.
Yeah. Okay.
But on the other hand, there are environmental groups, local people, Historic England, who are saying that actually it's not an appropriate site to dredge, even though the site was dredged in the 1970s. Things have moved on, our understanding of the marine environment and the sensitivities have moved on, and they shouldn't get a license to dredge now. The current situation is that the Marine Management Organisation, which grants licenses, has had an unprecedented third public consultation about this because it's so controversial. They were due to make a decision on whether to grant the license imminently. However, the story that we have covered, broke on Pipeline last night, we published it last night, is that back last summer, the director of licensing at the Marine Management Organisation, and this is an organisation that has a legal role, it oversees a legal process under UK legislation, the Marine and Coastal Access Act. The new director of marine licensing, who is a woman called Trudy Wakelin, who came from the Broads Authority in East Anglia, went to the Port of Dover ostensibly as part of an orientation tour when she took up her new post, but had an unrecorded, unminuted meeting with the chief executive of the Port of Dover, who's a man called Tim Waggett. And Miss Wakelin wrote in a blog afterwards that she provided him with comfort and reassurance.
Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a public official or a civil servant or any of that. But that sounds like awfully biased language, awfully inappropriate language for such a meeting, isn't it? Comfort and reassurance. Is it? Did this person need a hug? I mean, what was going on? Well,
the suspicion on the part of campaigners is that the Port of Dover has been staging a very robust campaign in support of its plan. To the extent that it's attacked a local campaign group called the Save Our Sands campaign that's based up the coast in Deal, and effectively accused them of NIMBYism. That they were campaigning against something that would was to the detriment of Dover and the people of Dover. Now that is all arguable, but in terms of the legal process here, people are concerned that what has happened was that the Port of Dover and the chief executive were saying basically, you may be paying undue attention to the campaigners, you're not listening to us on equal terms. That may be what the term comfort and reassurance was. It was comfort and reassurance that they are being listened to and taken seriously, and that their concerns about the economic future of Dover are being, addressed.
And have they offered the same comfort and reassurance to those who are campaigning?
This is part of the problem. Initially, the MMO and on Pipeline, I've seen correspondence to this effect. Initially, the MMO said there was no problem, and it was all above board and nothing to see here, folks. However, the various campaigners didn't let go of this, and eventually the MMO conceded that Trudy Wakeling could have a meeting with others, including Save Our Sands and local councillors who also opposed the dredging licence. But there's a sticking point at the moment in that they've only offered a meeting in London. The campaigners say, well, actually, that's not equal treatment. Again, that Port of Dover have had a meeting. We don't know. Nobody knows how long the meeting took because again, there's no minutes, there's no record of what was said, and it was on site in Dover because in her blog post, Trudy Wakeling wrote about seeing the pile drivers in action and seeing the construction in action. So if she didn't visit the construction site itself, she was certainly close enough to it to see all of that. So the meeting was in Dover. So therefore, a meeting in London in a conference room isn't equal treatment. The campaigners say.
Yeah, and also as well, in that sense, it doesn't offer the opportunity to give appropriate context to their concerns. It's all well and good going to London and talking about, it's like the people who, maybe wanted to entreat the government about big changes that were made to, I don't know, flooding of valleys to make reservoirs. Was it in the 1940s, 1930s? This kind of thing. It doesn't really give you a sense of the impact unless you go there, and unless you can actually see what it is that these people are passionate about. So yeah, it's not just a matter of, I think, of equal treatment, but it's also appropriate context. In the same way that it's impressive to see the pile drivers, it's also probably going to be heartwarming to see the natural environment as well. Now, just though, for the sake of arbitrary balance, now, and I hate that. I really do hate that word, because I suppose really what I mean is objectivity. In so much as there can be only one side to a story, there can be more than two. But in this instance, it's worthwhile touching on the fact that this is probably a good idea for the port of Dover. They in terms of capacity, they do require this expansion, and it sounds like they want to maintain, as it were, a competitive edge.
And the campaigners acknowledge that. The campaigners are not opposing the extension. What they are opposing is the dredging licence for the Goodwin Sands, because they say that will be too detrimental to the local environment, and that there are alternatives.
Well, and also, speaking of which, if just in case people haven't been following this previously, or when we've covered this previously, one of the reasons why we're mentioning it is not that there's a natural environment, but also that there are military connections. For example, lots of aircraft. Probably the most famous of examples being aircraft that went down in the Second World War in that area, which we talked about previously, how there may well be the aspiration to log and avoid dredging that area, but when you're dredging, by definition, you're moving vast quantities of ground, and therefore actually these points will move. You can't really guarantee with absolute precision.
Absolutely, and there are more complications even than that, because certainly in the Nautical Archaeology Society, in its submission to the Marine Management Organisation opposing the licence, argued that they couldn't think of a more inappropriate place in terms of the UK heritage to dredge sand and gravel around the UK coast. The reason for that is that historically the Goodwin Sands have been nicknamed a ship swallower. The ship swallower. There are an unknown number of wrecks on the Goodwins which will have, and ships will have begun going aground and sinking into the sand on the Goodwins as soon as the channel opened up and people became seafarers across what's now the English Channel. And I was speaking to somebody in the salvage industry the other day who was saying that a modern industrial dredger, if you run across, for example, a Bronze Age boat or a medieval cog, by the time you've noticed it coming up in the dredge head, it'll be pretty severely damaged, if not destroyed.
Mm.
So, and a wooden wreck will not show up, for example, in a lot of geophysics.
No.
So, a small wooden boat, historically important, but which is sunk into the sand and isn't visible, would not throw up a trace on a magnetometer survey or even on multi-beam sonar.
No.
So protecting a site as sensitive as the Goodwins is a very inexact science. We don't have the capability to do it as effectively as many people think we should, and therefore, in a precautionary way, the license shouldn't be granted.
Okay. So where do you see this going then in the coming weeks and months?
It is a very difficult situation because I spoke to a legal expert on this who said that while nothing necessarily illegal has gone on, in terms of the integrity of the license process, because there's this meeting which both sides admit wasn't recorded, they admit it took place, and they admit it and they agree it wasn't recorded. They haven't said, for example, nobody's denied, for example, that the Ms. Wakelin visited Dover at the invitation of the Port of Dover. That's not been made clear at all. But I spoke to, as I say, a legal expert on this about what the ramifications could be, and what I was told was two things. First of all, that the visit could be described as being, quote, professionally inappropriate, and possibly naive. And the other thing, which is the more serious thing, is that an unrecorded meeting like that between two very senior officers of the two organisations, one of which is overseeing a very sensitive application from the other, could be a ground for a judicial review if the MMO decided to grant a licence. In other words, they could have just scuppered their own process.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
We'll be back. I think we'll be discussing this one again.
Yeah, and I was just going to say there are a great many potential scuppering of own processes that seem to be happening in Britain at the moment, but I'm not going to go into any of that. Okay, interesting, and also, even if you're not local, which by a tremendous amount, I am not local. I am originally from North Wales, and I live in the northeast of England. I could not be further from Dover if I tried. This is an important example of, as ever, these things set precedents, and they communicate an awful lot about our priorities. And I think probably though a key balance here, especially at the moment, especially in the context of Brexit, is to show that progress is important, but it has to be progress with integrity. Otherwise, what are we doing really in that sense? So, as you say, we'll probably return to this at some point. But interesting, and as you say, I'm always amazed. Just briefly, I'm always amazed by how these people are able to have such naive meetings, as it were. Because I'm not at that level. I don't want to be in that level of kind of, management of these sort of things. But I would be very, very careful about that sort of stuff. Anyway, common sense and professionalism and all that kind of thing isn't a given.